My New Year's resolution for 2021 was to get my backlog of games together and finally play a bunch of stuff I've always wanted to but never had before. And well, I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about some of the neat stuff I played this year, as well as give some updates near the end of the video for the channel. So, how this is going to work is for every month this year I made a small list of 1 to 3 games I played during it that either really blew me away or I found particularly interesting and would love more people to try. Getting this list together was a little bit tricky due to technicalities. Like, say for example, if a game takes several months to finish, which month do you count it for? If you put a game down for a bit, then pick it up to finish it a few months later, does it count for the month you started it or the month you finished it? I'd suggest not thinking too hard about these rules. I know I certainly didn't. This video isn't meant to be taken too seriously, and I frankly just hoped you enjoy some of my picks for this year. So for January, I want to talk about the original Phantasy Star in Xenoblade Chronicles. Oh, and yeah, there's going to be a lot of JRPGs on this list, that's just me. And also, these are games I played at all this year, not just 2021 releases. I tend to not really be into super new releases anyway. Xenoblade Chronicles, I frankly don't have much to talk about because it's already one of the most critically acclaimed games of its genre of all time, and I basically like it for the exact same reasons everyone else does. The combat is fun, the characters are well written and deep, the story is gripping, I love the music, the presentation, the challenge is deep enough that JRPG experts can get really into it, yet simple enough that beginners can still wrap their head around it. I specifically played the Switch re-release of the game, if that means anything too. It's a great time overall. I also played the original Phantasy Star this month, which, oh boy, this was a blast from the past. This game was released in 1987, making it, I think, the oldest game to date I've managed to fully complete. It was a surreal experience. This era of RPGs has always felt so weird to go back to, since it was before a lot of tropes of the genre were finalized and built upon. And as a result, you get a lot of jank, but also a lot of really interesting experimental aspects. For example, all of the dungeons are from a first-person's perspective using the pseudo-3D effect. It was also the first JRPG to have a sci-fi aesthetic, and you can tell because of all the Star Wars references. I think it was also the first JRPG to feature an animal as a party member, and more groundbreakingly, a female protagonist. It's a hard game to recommend unless you're really into the history and origins of this genre, because it really does feel like an RPG from the 80s. But if you want to try something a little old school that's not from Square for once, give this one a shot. For February, I chose Dynamite Headdy, a very unique and charming platformer for the Genesis, made by the same company that created Gunstar Heroes and one of my personal favorite games of all time, Light Crusader. It's got a lot of that platformer mascot energy you got around this time, but this one stands out a lot by basing its entire world within a puppet show. The majority of characters are puppets, the bosses are puppets. All throughout the stages, you can even see fourth wall breaking architecture and stagehands making everything run. This is the first game on the list that I actually Let's Played as well. I actually did Let's Play a lot of the games I'm going to be talking about here, because some of them were also dev requests as well. This one wasn't, but I did do a Let's Play of it regardless. So if you want to see my blind reactions to a lot of this crazy game, go check that out. If I have Let's Played a game that is featured on this list, I'll leave a link below if you want to check it out. For March, I got a couple picks. The first one I'd like to mention is Papa's Mocharia. Do you remember the Papa Louie games, a series of flash games from back in the day where you run a variety of restaurants? Well, did you know that they're still making these? It's just that they release on mobile devices now, and I really like this change, actually. Seriously, these games play really intuitively on a touchscreen to the point at which it's genuinely hard to go back. In this one specifically, you run a shop that sells mocha lattes. You brew the coffee, you add syrup, some toppings on top of the customer wants them, and then a free cannoli to go. If you've played Papa Louie games before, you know exactly what to expect from this one. It is admittedly a you've played one, you've played them all kind of series, but the core gameplay is so much fun that I frankly don't care very much. Go try this one out, or maybe if you grew up with these older games, give their re-releases a download and see what kind of changes they've made since then. They are $2 a pop, which might sound insane given they used to be free, But I find that that price is perfectly appropriate for a game like this, and especially with the super old ones, they've added a ton of bells and whistles to make them more up to date with the much more recent ones. Seriously, it's a great series, and I can't wait for, like, the chicken sandwich one they're working on now. My second pick for March is an RPG Maker game. Surprisingly, the first one on this list, given how often I play them. Now, RPG Maker tends to be a pretty niche thing, but I always notice that every few years or so, we get one that really breaks the mold and even becomes a little mainstream. And we certainly had an example of that in late 2020 with OMORI. In this game, you play as a kid who's a recluse from society, and he spends a lot of his days daydreaming about this world that takes place within his mind called Headspace. It's a really interesting story about how people cope with anxiety, fear, depression, and I think association disorder. I'm gonna be honest, I mostly jumped into this one because I heard it was an Earthbound-like, and the core mechanic involving emotions as a stand-in for your status ailments seemed pretty interesting as well. If you're not necessarily into these types of quirky RPGs, this one isn't really going to change your mind. In fact, even at the end of the day, I still personally prefer games like Undertale and Lisa, but it's still a great time and easily one of the biggest success stories involving an RPG Maker game in a while. I Let's Played this one as well, and fun fact, I've actually been considering returning to it. I learned about this pretty late into my playthrough, but apparently there's a genocide route-esque ending you can go for in this game that involves you becoming even more cut off from society, resulting in you going even deeper into your mind world, eventually leading to new areas and even super bosses. I think it's called the Hikikomori route, or it's pronounced something like that. I'm gonna have to look into this one. I could just totally play in my own time, though. Trying it blind could be a playthrough idea for the future. For April, I have 3 games, starting with Anarcute. I absolutely love this game, and it's definitely one of my favorite short but sweet indie experiences, like, ever. You play as a group of cute animals in a world that's been taken over by this fascist police government, and you play as these animals as a big collective group, and you riot and violently protest against them. The simplest I can describe the gameplay style is, imagine Pikmin but way more focused on combat. It's a pretty unique style of game you don't necessarily see that often, and I frankly love everything about it. And speaking of unique gameplay styles you don't see too often, my next game is one I was actually sent a copy to Let's Play. Escape from Life Incorporated. Do you remember that Lost Vikings series back in the day where you controlled 3 separate entities and solved puzzles using their unique skills? This game has a very similar premise where you play as 3 animals who were captured by aliens and need to band together to find a way out. You have a fish, an eagle, and a reindeer. You can probably assume what their unique powers are based on that. The fish can swim, the eagle can fly, and the reindeer can head bash stuff. The writing is also, like, surprisingly good as well. Seriously, I love the characters in this game, and it's not something I really expected from what I assumed would just be a simple puzzle game. Give it a shot if any of that sounds interesting. My last April pick, and this is a pretty edgy choice, I'm aware, FNaF World. I think the story behind this game is after completing the first 4 FNaF games, the creator wanted to make something a little spin-off-y, so he pumped this thing together and people did not like it. His response to that was to take the game down, fix a ton of problems people had with it, and then re-release it for free. And well, regardless of what your opinions on Scott Cawthon are nowadays, he actually got cancelled this year, that is a genuinely commendable thing to do as a game developer. Even after fixing it, though, I can see why a lot of people wouldn't necessarily be a fan of this one, because it is one of the weirdest RPGs I think I've ever played. Yet, ironically, I like it a lot because of this. How this game works is you get thrown into a world with the main 4 characters from the first 4 FNaF games, and you can, like, arrange them in a party however you want. You're given almost no direction, but a giant world to explore, and from there you just wander around, defeating bosses, opening shortcuts, glitching out of bounds, finding treasures, and unlocking all new party members. It's a type of game that gives you a ton of tools to play around with, but doesn't really tell you how they work, which leads to a lot of time spent experimenting and learning mechanics in real time. And there's barely any consequences for death either, so it feels almost intended of you to stumble around until you happen to come across a strategy you happen to like. I seriously recommend it, almost as a casual sort of RPG. If you want to try something mechanically dense but don't feel like being bogged down by a big story or overly complicated mechanics, give this one a try, even if, like me, you're not personally a fan of FNaF, because I end up enjoying this one a lot more than I thought I would. For May, my first game is OneShot, a very popular RPG Maker game that I am shocked I have not tried until now. You play as a god who helps this kid named Nico through a dying world, its only hope being a light bulb they found early in their adventure, and it can be used to restore the world from its former glory. The biggest selling point of this game to me was its very clever use of metafiction. There are tons of moments throughout the game that require you to dig through the game files to find clues, move them around to solve puzzles, but it somehow managed to go a step crazier than even a lot of modern metafiction games. I really had to think outside the box to get through this game, sometimes quite literally. Like, it's a wonderful time, so much so that I actually went back to it a few months later to do the Secret Solstice route as well. Like, it's an interesting game with a very deep and dense world. I like it a lot. So, we all hate Donald Trump, right? Is that a safe enough assumption given my audience demographics? Well, I was sent a game this year to play called A Postmortem Nation, a game set 500 years in the future where Donald Trump becomes an evil JRPG-style Dark Lord. Don't take this game too seriously if you decide to play it. It's deliberately very tongue-in-cheek, and given how the dev talked about it in their emails, it seems they're pretty self-aware about this too. Oh, it also has highlight references in it for, like, the 5 people on Earth who care about that game. I think the thing that especially appealed to me about this one is that it was the first full-length game I was sent that was made with RPG Maker MZ, the most recent version of the software that was released in late 2020. I've gotten a couple experimental things made with it, but this is the first one that was a big beginning-to-end adventure that utilized a lot of new features and plugins. It was pretty interesting and a pretty good first impression as a player of RM games as opposed to a dev. For June, I have a few games as well, starting with Chicory: A Colorful Tale. This is the newest game by Greg Labanov, a developer I've been following since around 2013 with his release of Coin Crypt. In this one, you play as a dog in a land where the colors of the world are painted by a single individual referred to as the Wielder, and you become the new Wielder. It's a game all about personal expression. You paint the world however you like, there's a ton of customization options, new brushstrokes and stamps to unlock. Even the protagonist's name and gender is up to interpretation. I love how much it commits to this theme, while at the same time delivering on a heartwarming story of a ton of memorable characters and areas. The best I can describe it from a purely gameplay perspective is imagine a Zelda-style game, but with much more of an emphasis on puzzle solving, collecting, and world building. It's a very casual game I feel just about anyone could pick up and get something out of, and yeah, I highly recommend it. There were also 2 games in particular that I was sent this month that really impressed me and I would love to see get more attention. The first is Lifelike, a still in development Earthbound-like, where you play as this kid who works for an extermination agency. But instead of exterminating anything normal, they go after inanimate objects that come to life as monsters, which is something I'm very vocal about being a fan of. In fact, that's actually how the developer opened their email when they originally reached out to me with a free copy to try for the channel. This game is not very long as of right now, just being a free prologue and a 1 chapter after that, but what's here is incredibly promising. The game has a lot of charm, with catchy music, memorable enemy design, some interesting gameplay mechanics involving parrying and spells that you have to play minigames to do well. I personally can't wait to try more of this one when they eventually make more. Another game I was sent this month that I especially liked was Starshift. Now, I am not a sci-fi guy personally. I tend to prefer game worlds a little more down-to-earth and modern, pun fully intended, but this one really broke that mold for me and ended up becoming one of my favorite games I've been sent this year. This one isn't complete yet either though, but there's still a lot of content and worlds to explore in what is the current build of the game. There's a lot of areas to explore all around this galaxy, and the story and character writing is just thrilling. Apparently this game takes heavy inspiration from Mass Effect, which is a series I'm not really familiar with, but honestly, I like this game so much that it genuinely got me interested to want to try that series one day. Like, how often can a game do that? This is a tale I can see myself coming back to on occasion on the channel. In fact, in my dev request list, I actually have a side game the developers made, set in the same universe, which I am very much looking forward to. Go check this game out if it interests you. The game is actually free on Steam as of right now, and while it advertises itself as a demo, it's actually a bit more akin to an early access build, because it's really quality for a free game. I got a couple picks for July, starting with Balloon's Tower Defense 6. So, kinda like with Papa Louie, I grew up with this Tower Defense Flash series back in grade school, and without me knowing, has continuously gotten new installments since I stopped playing it. This being the most recent one, and likely the last considering its business model is more akin to a mobile game. But here I mean the cool type of mobile game that doesn't bombard you with scummy microtransactions and pay-to-win mechanics, but instead new maps and features slowly over time. Though it does still have microtransactions, no game's perfect. As someone who grew up with the series, I really love how familiar yet fresh everything feels here. All the classic towers are back with all new upgrades and mechanics to them, and the new towers are a lot of fun too. It also introduces a new mechanic called Heroes to the mix, one-of-a-kind units you can only have one per map of. I'm personally a little mixed on this mechanic, but they do add more strategy and potential to the experience. Balloons is still as addictive and fun as you remember it being. I overall really like this one. Another thing I played this month was Lawmage Academy. This is another game I was sent to Let's Play. It's a game of a very heavy Harry Potter influence, being about a kid who goes to a school that teaches you how to become wizards. There's a 4-house structure, you got different classes and fieldwork to do and the like. This is an impressively polished RPG Maker game. I love the mechanics of having to balance classwork with your friendships with fellow students, as well as your funds to keep yourself stocked in items and craftables, and crafting to do with those said items, all while making sure you don't get too exhausted. It's a game you can really min-max, which is super up my alley. I especially love this game's world building too. All of the rules on how magic works and the like are laid out and easy to follow, which in turn benefits the plot greatly. Like Starshift, this one isn't complete yet as well, although also like with that game, its demo is free and is surprisingly long for what it is. I'm very excited to play more of this in the future. For August, we have a few picks, starting with Cook Serve Delicious 3. Now, I am a big fan of the original Cook Serve Delicious, which released all the way back in 2012. It's a very fast-paced restaurant sim where you make your food using button combinations, almost like you're playing a fighting game. This year, I had the idea to do a Let's Play marathon of this series, since it is now a trilogy. The latter two I'd be playing blind. The first one was just as fun as I remember it being. The second I did enjoy, though I do feel like it's objectively the worst of the trilogy. The third one, though, oh my god, the third one. It basically took every problem I had with 2, and while not necessarily fixing them, changing the context of the entire game structure to make them work better than I ever could have imagined. The sides mechanic that I thought was a little dumb, well, customers can now order them as their own meal, which makes perfect sense since you're now running a food truck. And speaking of running a food truck, this also allowed them to make modular routes and lengths for stages. Instead of which food you can use being arbitrarily up to whichever cook for hire stage you're doing, you can now say the people of that route will only eat, I don't know, say Mexican food or something as a result of this route system. I hated how food was unlocked in 2, and 3 made the entire system way more expedient and easier to wrap your head around. It's everything I ever wanted out of this series, really, and easily one of my favorite games I played this year. I got a really odd one next. Contact. This is a 2006 release for the Nintendo DS created by the No More Heroes developers. It's about a kid meeting a professor from space who takes him on an adventure to help him collect cells to fix his rocket ship. And well, that may be a pretty basic start, but the story gets really engaging as you get farther and farther into it. Your adventure takes you to a desert island, a secret military compound, ancient castles. There's even a mall dungeon that has you going inside arcade machines. There's also this really fun mechanic involving costumes. You can find all these outfits for the protagonist, and they're sort of like your job classes. Wearing different ones gets you different abilities and ways to complete puzzles. This is probably the strangest RPG I've ever played for the DS. It's incredibly meta, even fourth wall breaking sometimes. The entire adventure, the kid is on the bottom screen while the professor is on the top, and you, the player, are portrayed as an omnipotent being, which helps the two connect and communicate, as you guide and control Terry on the bottom screen while the professor gives you hints on the top. The game's art style and aesthetic is all over the place. You have everything from like basic pixel art to photorealism, but in a way that adds to the experience. The world you explore of Terry is gorgeous, probably some of the most beautiful pixel art I've ever seen, while the professor's screen is way more blocky and old school. The music also has this kind of duality as well. Like, there's a lot of good music variety in this game. My one biggest criticism with this game, though, is the battle system. And to make matters worse, this game can get kinda hard at points, so it really expects you to learn how all of it works and even grind a little bit. The simplest I can describe it is, imagine Secret of Mana, but if it were semi-automated. It's not an auto battle. You can still move your character around and use skills whenever, but stuff like attack speed and parrying are all up to RNG, as well as a dozen or so additional mechanics whenever you're next to enemies. It is really hard to wrap your head around, and it doesn't explain a lot of its mechanics very well either. It's cool to try and min-max once you do get a handle on everything, though even by endgame I still felt like I didn't fully get it. I gotta say though, in spite of the annoying battle system, this game is truly worth it. Its writing style, locations, and characters almost makes it feel almost like an Earthbound-like about a decade before they were cool. Trust me, if you like the types of games that I tend to play out on this channel, check this one out. I absolutely love it and highly recommend it. My final game for August was a game I was sent to Let's Play, Panthea. You know, games like this and Postmortem Nation are why I keep advocating for RPG Maker games made with default assets, because sometimes people can really pull something off that's extremely cool with just using the most basic assets you get to start with the software. And this one is extremely well designed and fun to play from beginning to end. The thing that makes this one particularly cool is it makes a lot of really minor changes to the typical formula you'd expect that add up to an extremely unique experience. For example, there are no levels in this game. This allows it to be set up in such a way that you can do a ton of areas in any order you want. But there's also a crafting system, and a really well-designed one too, where nothing requires an insane amount of grinding and you're constantly unlocking new recipes and items to make new things with. And the absence of levels works in tandem with this to make it a mechanic you'll really want to play around with, since it's the only way your stats are ever going to go up. There's also a ton of customization of what your characters can equip. How you learn new skills is pretty creative. Again, it's just a lot of little things that add up to create something that really feels more than just another RPG Maker game, despite admittedly looking a little like one at first glance. I don't think this one is nearly finished yet either, but I'll certainly be looking forward to more of this in the future. For September, I'm starting with Night in the Woods. Now, this is a game I actually watched an LP of at launch, but never got a chance to actually try myself until now. It's a slice-of-life game about this college dropout trying to fit back in at home again, but has a very hard time doing so as a result of everyone she knows growing up and having to deal with more adult stuff and her own struggles with a mental disorder. It's a game that managed to be very wholesome yet very depressing at the same time, a tone I always can get sort of into. You learn more about May, her family, friends, neighbors, and history of this forgotten mining town she calls home, as she just tries to live her life in an increasingly troubled community. There's so many people to just talk to and learn about, and it makes for a very immersive experience. My other September pick is Deltarune Chapter 2. I love Toby Fox's work, and this is just another great experience from the guy. This episode of Undertale's Pseudo-Sequel has you going into a computer world with monsters and obstacles based off of old computer equipment and software. It's a great time and basically just more of what you expect from this series. For October, I have Yokai Watch 3. So, this is a creature capture RPG series where a lot of the monsters are based off of Japanese yokai. It's pretty fun, and over the past couple years, my sister has been lending me the main trilogy on the 3DS to try out. I like them a lot. All three of them have very unique strengths and weaknesses, so it's kind of hard to pick a favorite, but 3 is certainly the most ambitious one of the trilogy. This one features 2 protagonists, a whole-ass new world to explore in the form of BBQ, basically an accumulation of what Japanese game developers think of when you ask them to imagine a stereotypical American town. Like, seriously, this game probably has one of the funniest localizations I've ever seen. It also has over 700 recruitable monsters, as well as a ton of minigames if you're into that sort of thing. But on the other hand, this is like the RPG I'm going to jump to from now on whenever I need to explain what feature creep is. The amount of stuff in this game is downright overwhelming to a point in which I cannot fathom what the quote-unquote optimal way to play it would even be. It's still a great time though if you've never tried this series before, I would still recommend the first or second one to start out. They're better starting points and they're a hell of a lot cheaper too. In November, I have a weird choice. VR chat. Now, whenever I saw people talk about this game online, the impression I always got was that this was just like Second Life but for furries, which, well, I mean, that's kind of true, but a couple non-furry friends convinced me to actually try it one day, and it's surprisingly addictive. Now, given I don't own a VR headset, so it's not like I can play this game to its absolute fullest, but there's a surprising amount of fun to be had in just following friends to random worlds and exploring around. It kind of reminds me of when I was a kid and I would download random maps and mansions and cities in SketchUp, and then explore them using the walk-around function. Did anyone else do anything like that as a kid? I've actually been thinking of potentially making a video essay about this game at some point. I personally think asking some friends to give me a selection of random maps to tour and then documenting my experience could be kind of fun. We'll put that idea on the back burner. I don't know if I'm going to do it, it's just something I think could be kind of interesting. This entire game feels surreal and dreamlike, and while that's probably not what they were intending to go for, I managed to get some weird sense of fun out of this one. Another game I tried this month is Fech the Ferret. This game is still early in development, and its demo is only about 20 minutes, but it's an open-world freerunner type game where you play as this zippy ferret and do platforming, parkour, and it's just really cool and fun to run around in. I don't have too much to say about this one as of right now, but I see a ton of potential in this project, and will eagerly be awaiting its eventual release. And my final game of this year is a particularly special one. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, back in 2015, I made my first full game of RPG Maker, and it was a not very good, but in my opinion still kind of charming game about an old man named Eugene. He was a tamer, who are these people who with the power to recruit monsters. And it was basically a really short pseudo-creature capture game using those mechanics. My pick for this month is a fan sequel someone made to my game, Tamer Island F2 by Azrael101. It takes place in the far future where Eugene's story is seen as no more than a fairy tale. And you play as a kid named Yu who wants to follow in his footsteps. You go on your own adventure across the islands Eugene traversed, recruiting a whole new generation of tameable monsters while experiencing a story way more deep and thought through than my old-ass game ever could be. This game was a real treat to end the year on, and I can't thank Azrael and the people who helped them enough for making it. And one honorable mention I'd like to give for this year is Psychonauts 2, which I am absolutely loving, though I'm just not finished with yet, so I don't feel comfortable placing it on a list of my favorite games I fully played this year. Rest assured, though, I am really enjoying it. In fact, Aaron and I are actually recording it together. We're both playing it blind, which I think is a first for the channel, and that playthrough is going to start going up in late January, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, those are my favorite games I played this year. For the games I mentioned that do have digital releases, as well as, Let's Plays that I did of them, I'll post links to all of that in the description below, so if any of that sounds interesting, feel free to give them a try. Now, I actually have a couple updates I would like to talk about too before I leave this video off, and the first one you might have already noticed. A couple weeks or so ago, I changed my YouTube avatar to this. This is not the GameDog dog logo you're all familiar with that I've been using variations of online since like 2009. It is instead one of my characters. I draw a lot of these cartoon characters for Twitter and Discord mostly, and for years I've always wanted to try integrating one of them into the channel's identity a little more, almost like a channel mascot, if you will. I got a lot of characters, honestly, but the specific one I'm using here is a character named Ardust, which is spelled like this. It's a little confusing. She's this barricade of a sword, and I chose her specifically because I feel like she represents a lot of what I do and enjoy online, because her gimmick is she's supposed to invoke a cliché JRPG protagonist. I just mentioned that she has a sword, but she's also mute. Her design uses primary colors and is designed to look androgynous. She uses earth magic. Sometimes I draw her with this animal companion, which is something I see a lot from RPG protagonists sometimes. Basically, like any sort of cliche thing you can think of from an RPG protagonist, that kind of is something that Ardust has as well. Like, that's kind of her core gimmick. Heck, the design on her shirt is even supposed to look like a bastardized Golden Sun logo, a game I've outright praised for how cliche it is before in one of my super old video essays. And given how many RPGs I play online, she felt like a very appropriate character to do this with, you know? So yeah, I'm trying to turn Ardust into a bit of a channel mascot. I don't really know what this would entail at this point in time, like, I don't know, maybe I could make a channel intro featuring her, or turn her into a marketable plushie down the line. We'll see, but people who have commented on this change seem to like it so far. What do you guys think? And also, another thing I've done is, I've made a demo for a game. Yeah, I play so many RPG Maker games for the channel, I figured it's about time I try my own hand at one for the first time since, like, 2016. It takes place in the same universe of a book I wrote back in 2018, a few years after it specifically, but I tried to write it in such a way that you don't need to have to read it in order to follow the plot. You play as this new character, a kangaroo inventor named Michael, who travels to the Mall District to try some experiments of a monster that appears there. The demo is around 30 to 60 minutes and very dialogue heavy, with the most complete part of it being the shopkeepers. If you want to try it out, I'll leave a link below. You'll need this code to view it though. I've gotten some good feedback and things to improve on already, but I'd love to see more people try it out regardless. Let me know what you think. And that's all I have to talk about. Thank you all again for your support with the channel and everything I do, and I will see you folks later. Thanks for watching.